Hello, everyone.
Hi. It's amazing to be sitting here. 1,100 students who came to hear you speak.
Oh, my goodness.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I'm so honored, and we're so happy to have you here. Let me start by introducing our guests, although a few important things were already said. You were born in 1989 in the Bronx, daughter to Puerto Rican New Yorkers. So let me start by asking, how excited are you that Puerto Rico won the Super Bowl?
Puerto Rico may not have an NFL team, but we do have the best halftime show
Absolutely.
in American history.
So maybe for the very few people who did not watch, I'm referring, of course, to the halftime performance by Puerto Rican artist Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl. And we are both Latinas, so obviously we felt it very deeply, but I also feel that beyond the Latin American community, a lot of people felt it very deeply. So what do you think is the cultural and political significance of that visibility, that unapologetic visibility of Latin culture in this moment?
Yes, you know, it is, it's so interesting, and it is so impactful that this halftime show felt so resonant for so many people, because in this moment and in the political environment and conditions that we're in, where cruelty has become in vogue and inhumanity and callousness is seen as this kind of sophisticated, realpolitik kind of approach to the world, a halftime show based not just in proudly centering Latin Americans and immigrants of all kinds in the United States who are under attack, but also Latin American culture is so communal, and it is so warm and compassionate, like many other cultures around the world, that just centering kindness and, you know, in Spanish there's a word cariño. And this is like this, cariño is like this, I don't know how you would translate it, but it's
like warmth.
It's like a cherishing of one another. And that just putting those values on television felt countercultural, rebellious, resistant. And that, I think, speaks so much to the moment that we are in, that it was defiant. And I think mainstreaming that is so important, even though it may seem like something we would have taken perhaps for granted just a few short years ago.
Sí, qué orgullo. But
sí,
we will switch to English, no worries. So let me move along in your biography, maybe ask you a few questions. You studied international relations and economics at Boston University, interned for Senator Ted Kennedy at some point, and after graduation, you returned home to help out your family after your father had passed away. You had to take odd jobs, you had to be a waitress and supporting your family. So you, at that time, already got involved in the organizing and politics. But when was the moment where you actually realized, okay, I don't want to just look at politics, I actually want to do something?
Yes, you know, I think that whole journey was so formative to my life and to my experience. My mother was born in Puerto Rico. My father was born in the Bronx, in New York. And I grew up at a time when the Bronx was experiencing some of the highest dropout rates, high school dropout rates in its history. And my parents moved to a suburb to try to move me to a public school area where I could have a chance. And I think, you know, so much of this was built on the promise of the American dream, that if you work hard, and even if you are born or come from economically challenging circumstances, that you can be entrepreneurial, that you can work hard. My mother cleaned houses growing up to put me through school. My father started a small business. And we struggled, but we were starting to make it. They were able to finally buy a home, which is part of the white picket fence American dream. And around the time I was 16 years old, my father was diagnosed with cancer. Of course, in the United States, healthcare is not treated as a human right. It is not universal. And so we suffered greatly financially through his chemotherapy treatments. And I got into college and I started studying in school. And the first week of my sophomore year of college, my father passed away. And my mother was left to be a single mom and trying to support 2 children on a house cleaner's salary. And I really saw and lived the same story that so many Americans can have, where it's that you are promised this American dream, you do everything right. My parents came here, they tried to raise 2 kids, put them through college, get an education, and it all fell apart. And this was all during the 2008 recession. And so after I graduated college, we were, by that time, on the brink of losing our home, and I started waitressing because it was in the wake of the Great Recession. There was no jobs available, and it's how you could walk home with cash in your pocket. I felt very cynical about our politics, especially about the 2-party system in the United States, because the Bush tax cuts were made permanent under a Democratic administration. They were made by a Republican administration, made permanent during a Democratic administration. You grow up with this background. We had the Iraq War, and it felt just very much, you started to see the same banks and the same large corporations contributing to both political parties at this time. And I grew very cynical. I felt, what is the point in electoral politics? It feels like no one is fighting for me. And it feels like, more importantly, our politics had really drifted away from seeing families like mine. And there was a time when I gave up on it. I was very cynical, and I just said, you know what, I'm just going to put down my head, and I'm just going to work and just accept these conditions. And when you do that, life gets very depressing. It's very dispiriting when you give in to that. And I think it just kind of got to a point where it was just intolerable. And I thought, you know what? Even if it is impossible to change this Herculean system, I will feel better about my life having tried. And so I first started really engaging in activist and advocacy communities. I went to Standing Rock to resist the Keystone XL pipeline at that time. I got involved with many other activist movements. I still thought there was no way I would ever be able to get elected to office. And then, you know, the opportunity arose where I looked at my own backyard and I saw that our elected representative, I looked him up in one day and I said, I've never seen this person in my life. And I kind of felt to myself, there hadn't been a primary election. He had kind of been named to the seat. And I said, I might as well run. And I think it was that switch that was important. It's less the decision to run for political office that was important to me. I think the most consequential decision is resisting cynicism. Having gone there, visited it, and then made the active decision that it is no way to live a life. And I think that is the thing that is the stuff that successful political movements are really made of.
Yeah. Like I said, we have over 1,000 students here tonight, many of whom I'm sure care deeply about the state of the world and our politics, but maybe also feel overwhelmed or powerless or even cynical sometimes. So what is your advice to young people who are politically engaged but don't know how to take the next step or want to actually begin getting involved into politics?
I think one of the things that can't be underestimated is the power that young people, and particularly students, have. It can be an overwhelming time, and that is by design. The right wing in the United States, they call this the flood the zone strategy. And that is if your senses can be overwhelmed, if you can be brought to a place of paralysis with new news developments every day, that you will say, there's so much to do, I don't know what I can do, I'm just one person, so I'm just not going to do anything. And that is how, that's how they try to operate. That is their strategy for power. And the one thing that I can't emphasize enough is that there genuinely is no action too small. There is no organizing too insignificant, and all too often people dismiss the smallest actions before they even start because they're too small. And when I think about some of the formative moments that led up to an ascendant progressive left in the United States, they were things that people dismissed. The Occupy Wall Street movement began as a collective of students, and it grew. And in the moment, even when it was disrupted and dismantled, it created a cultural moment that captured the attention of millions of people. And in that immediate moment, people would have said, well, it didn't accomplish anything, it wasn't successful, but it really planted the seeds that then rolled into a lot of the energy just a few short years later of Bernie Sanders' first presidential campaign, of which I got, I kind of cut my teeth doing electoral organizing. And so I would say that no action is too small and too insignificant. We are all drops that, when put together, make an ocean, but we don't see the ocean at the start. So I would really say that having faith in your convictions and your smallest decisions genuinely matters.
So, moving on in your biography, you entered Congress in 2018 during the first Trump presidency. Now, with Trump back in office, I think many Europeans are still asking, how did this happen again? Mm-hmm. So what is your analysis of why the authoritarian politics have gained such traction in the United States?
I think there's a lot of dynamics that feed into that. One is that universally there are material conditions, political conditions, cultural conditions that can sow the seeds for far-right movements. But they are also opportunities to go a different way. One, in terms of material conditions, is that when you have economic stagnation for the working class, that, especially in an environment where GDP is growing, that is the stuff of populist movements, period. The choice is what direction those populist movements can go. I was at Munich just a few days ago, and this conversation about populism came up, and it was universally derided as negative. And I want to challenge that frame a little bit, because populism at its core means a politics that is directly proximate to the people. And when you have populist movements rising up, almost regardless of their ideology, it is telling us something. The ascent of populist movements is telling us that governments have strayed too far from being responsive to the working class. And so populist movements can all have, they are mechanisms of delivery And it really matters what they deliver. When you have economic stagnation for the working class and GDP is growing, it is an injustice. And one path and one story is, they both, frankly, need to provide a prescription of why and who is causing this. One direction is we are going to blame this on the vulnerable in society, on immigrants, on people of different gender identities, on a cultural or the educated and an anti-intellectualist movement. That's the stuff that right-wing populist movements are made of. And that, of course, is all done as a distraction from the truth, which is that it is economic elites that are taking the lion's share of growth for themselves and leaving crumbs for the working class. So the alternative to the lie, which is that it is the most vulnerable in society that is doing this, the alternative is a populist movement that tells the truth. A populist movement that says, this is an injustice. You are being screwed over. And that story is not a cultural one, but a class one. And that it is a class one. And the answer is, I think there's an inherent reaction when we have a right wing blaming any given segment of people to say, no, we stand with those people. It is important to say that, but we have to go deeper. We don't stand with these populations because it is just because it is the morally right thing to do, although it is. We don't stand with them out of the goodness of our hearts or charity. We stand with them because it is strategic, because we are united as a class, and we will not be divided within our class. And so the alternative truth-telling prescription is not expulsion and targeting of people based on our differences, but a championing of higher wages, stronger safety nets, and accountability to those elites who are abusing our systems and our productivities for themselves. And it is accountability, it is antitrust, it does require a confrontation with power. And that, I think, is what is different about the time that we are coming into. We all need to buckle up. That is the moment that we are in. But if there is any place that shows that good people can prevail over the horrors of inhumanity, it is Berlin. It is Berlin. And it is so many other places around the world that can be a front line to show that we can overcome and we can defeat fascism by a class-based solidarity that champions all of us. I think about this, and I'll end with this note, but I think about this very often because, of course, the universal healthcare systems in Europe are the envy of every American. And it is truly such a revolutionary environment that you all grow up in, the universality of healthcare, because it really is a decision and an affirmative material commitment to everyone's basic humanity, to human dignity. And to me, it is not a coincidence that universal healthcare systems across Europe were established in the wake after World War II. They are directly connected, where you had all of this destruction and all of this rubble that was built on a politics of persecution and division. But when we decided to move past that, we built material systems based on universality, affirming our human dignity. And I think it's so important for us to recall those lessons for today as we confront many of the shadows of those similar movements.
So when it comes to the discussion of the rise of the far right, critics, especially on the conservative political spectrum, often will claim that the political left is partly to blame because it has been too woke or concerned with identity politics. So I know this accusation has been leveled at you at times as well, although whenever I check your social media, you're on the picket line or striking with workers. Nevertheless, how do you respond to this accusation that progressive kind of must choose between being pro-worker on the one hand or pro-immigrant, pro-climate, pro-LGBTQ on the other hand?
Yes, well, I think it's true that the prevailing message that I discuss has always been class-based issues. There is a political establishment, and I'll call this an economic power establishment in the United States that seeks to use cultural issues as a division. And part of that is also by trying to mischaracterize many on the left as saying, the prevailing thing that we care about is this. But that is why I think it's been so important to move the Overton window on economic issues and to use my platform to do that. That's why I discuss improving and expanding Medicare and making it available to everyone in the United States. Those are the foundational messages that we use to break through. But it also takes many different messengers, and that's part of why political movements, and that's the strategic advantage that we have on the left, which is that we do include everybody. So you can have messengers of all different kinds of identities, races, backgrounds, all echoing united on a similar economic message. Because at the end of the day, we all are more resonant with differing communities. And that's why all of us together are able to say something that breaks through. It can't just be all on one person. And that's why I'm so grateful for the diversity of so many people on the left, of men on the left, of women on the left, of just people of all different races and backgrounds. We have to operate as a choir to get the message through.
You alluded to the fact that Germany indeed has a pretty strong welfare state, stronger than the US. We have minimum wage, universal health care, no university tuition, strong labor protections. So while the German working class is in general more protected in an economic sense, it also is dealing with the growing inequality, because we have seen a real wage growth has been stagnant. The amassment of wealth in the hands of very few and corporations is increasing. So even though the safeguarding is a bit higher, the relative inequality is increasing and is at the root, like you said, of this polarization. So you made the case in Munich also for fighting this amassment of wealth in the hands of few. I'm curious, how did the good people of Munich react for you to make the case for more wealth distribution?
Yes, well, I was on the populist panel, which was very funny. I think that there were differing dynamics, of course, in Munich. And one is that you are starting to see the ascent of the right, even in places like Munich. Marco Rubio's speech was a pure appeal to Western culture. My favorite part was when he said that American cowboys came from Spain.
I thought they came from Winnetou, but
I believe the Mexicans and descendants of African enslaved peoples would like to have a word on that. But I think it's also important to note how thin that foundation is. Culture is changing. Culture always changed. Culture, for the entire history of human civilization, has been a fluid, evolving thing that is a response to the conditions that we live in. And so they want to take this mantle of culture. At the end of the day, though, it is very thin. And so the response that we have to have is, again, it's material, it's class-based, it's common interest. And so I think what was interesting about the reception is that I think the old way is realizing that they've had their way. They've had their economic deals structured exactly the way that they wanted it. They've had their, all of the ways you can govern, they've had their way in doing it, and they are losing ground. And so I think while there was certainly more openness to what I was saying than probably there would be in years past, we can't underestimate the appeal of going back to these well-worn grooves. A lot of what we talk about when we talk about a class-based internationalist perspective also means ending the hypocrisy towards the global South. And that is a challenge that is difficult for much of the typical crowd at Munich to hear. We look at what happened in Venezuela, for example. It is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state and engage in acts of war just because the nation is below the equator. And and by the way, Rubio and the Trump administration left Maduro's regime intact. And so even whatever moralizing they have about it, they're just as much a culprit in ignoring the election results as anybody else. But also, we have to understand that when they come for one, they come for us all. It's not a coincidence that when there was such a meek reaction to what happened in Venezuela, they immediately turned around and set their sights on Greenland. And that is why we have to recognize that respecting these standards and strengthening them across the world is what ultimately what protects all of us individually as well.
Yes, and it's important to reiterate that the case of Venezuela is not complicated or complex from an international law legal standpoint, but very clear. Let me move on to the transatlantic relations. And one of the key issues at the core of the fray we have experienced in the past year is the trade policy that the United States has leveled as political leverage against Europe, but also other parts of the world as well. You have called for a trade policy that serves workers, not just the economic elites. The German wealth model is very much based on trade. So obviously we're very curious to know, how does a worker-centered trade policy look like to you?
Mm-hmm. I think when we think of trade policy, we think about trying to lower some of the barriers to trade. Tariffs, famously, is a central part of that conversation. But oftentimes in our trade agreements, what doesn't get discussed is some of the most important pieces that are hurting working people the world over. There are hundreds of pages of non-tariff related policies that are included in these trade agreements that amount to corporate protectionism. And when I think about this, I think about, for example, in the WTO, there are agreements that every nation, every signatory must increase their patent year holdings for pharmaceutical companies, for example. And so the United States had 17-year patents where, of course, we develop many pharmaceutical drugs in the United States, cancer treatments, all sorts of different kinds of treatments. The United States originally had a 17-year patent length for pharmaceutical drugs. We then had to increase that patent length in order to be in accordance with the WTO. And that meant that pharmaceutical companies held onto their patents longer. Drugs could not go generic. That meant that it drove up costs on healthcare systems in the entire world in order to more benefit the bottom line of pharmaceutical companies. Or in other types of tariff agreements, that you can't discriminate and you can't have laws against financial institutions that have multiple services, which led to the downfall of the Glass-Steagall Act in the United States, which separated banks and kept them small in order to prevent what happened ultimately in 2008, where banks got too big to fail. And that precipitated not just in the US housing crisis, but of course, famously, it became a global financial crisis. And so our trade policies, they call them trade policies, but there's so much that's tucked inside them precisely because our democracies would never allow these things to happen in your parliament, nor in my Congress. It would be too difficult to pass it on its own. And so all too often, global trade is used as a backdoor for major corporations and industries to get away with policy changes that they would not be able to otherwise. And these need to become much more central pieces of our focus, especially now as tech companies seek to erode all protections on privacy and user data so that they can commodify our personal information. And I would not be surprised if they use trade agreements in order to advance that as well.
You had this conversation in Munich about the rules-based order. You alluded to it earlier, and you said something very striking in Munich, and if I may quote loosely what you said, that basically for much of the global south, the rules-based order never really felt rules-based, especially those looking at it from Asia, Africa, Latin America, or the Middle East. And still, with all its imperfections, one has to acknowledge that the United Nations, international law, and institutions did provide sort of a framework for international relations. And this multilateral system is being constantly attacked by the Trump administration. So what would a credible international order look like from your perspective?
Yes, this is one of many issues that I had with Secretary Rubio's speech when he derided the UN and had the audacity to say that the United Nations played no role in resolving the conflict in Gaza, when he fully well knows that the United States vetoed nearly every ceasefire resolution that came overwhelmingly to the United Nations. Is using the United States' own veto of the UN's attempts and then blaming the United Nations for the US's veto, essentially, on these issues. And so, it is something that is going to require, I think, a real assessment. Of course, we'd like to see some institutions have teeth, whether it's the ICC or whether it's other institutions with the UN. But I think what is challenging is that it does require a frank conversation about power dynamics. We are all a part of history. And in the 19th century, it was an age of colonization. In the 20th century, you see many liberatory movements across the world and the establishment of international bodies, but it still had many of the shadows of the power dynamics from the 19th century. And so in the 20th century, I think we have to have conversations about what power looks like, especially as we navigate ascendant economies across the entire world. And so, I think that this is something that has to be an international conversation. But, I think one of the things that we've seen, particularly in Gaza, is we cannot allow the entire world to look the other way when we all are seeing with our own eyes what is happening.
I will come back to this topic, but if I might take a step back, you have in the past traveled to Latin America. We talked about this earlier. And you also visited my other home country, Chile, and acknowledge U.S. responsibility for past interventions and the human rights violations and suffering that succeeded that. My personal history is entrenched with that. My grandfather was a political refugee for the Pinochet regime. So why was it important for you, and it's part maybe of this new rules-based order that we have to build, to not only look at the future, but also take accountability for the past? Why is it important in foreign policy?
Well, I think we are in a moment where these right-wing populist movements gaining ground in the United States, here in Germany and other parts of the world, it's not a coincidence. It is an internationalist movement. Steve Bannon is very close with and Steve Bannon and many of the right are actively working in Hungary, with Orbán, with Bolsonaro, with many of these right-wing authoritarian movements and leaders. It is intentional, it is coordinated. And if any single one of us is invested in the strengthening of democracy in our own nation, we have an obligation to be part of an internationalist movement to defend democracy globally. And when we talk about that era, going to Latin America was it was a very significant moment in my life. I led the first Spanish-speaking U.S. delegation to visit Latin American countries. We went to Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. And we have to understand, and there was so much that we were doing that had to deal with addressing U.S. interventionism in the 1970s and the 1980s and in other decades. And it's important that we learn from that, because Pinochet did not act on his own. You had Henry Kissinger, who was an author of much of the interventionist U.S. policies that involved regime change throughout the world. And when you look at Henry Kissinger and the Nixon administration and Henry Kissinger's time, and the fact that it is correlated with figures like Pinochet and also the right-wing movements in Brazil and others, we have to see here that we are seeing a pattern.
Yes.
And recognizing it allows us to draft and figure out the alternative. And that, again, it allows us to kind of break down those barriers and build these international movements that are necessary for resisting that erosion of democracy.
You mentioned Gaza already, so I think it's an important topic to address in front of young people, because I feel especially they have been very disillusioned by the Western support of Israel's war in Gaza. And you have been outspoken in your criticism of this unconditional support for Netanyahu's government. I feel I have been as well here in Germany. Still, our criticism notwithstanding, our two countries, US and Germany, have certainly been at the forefront of supporting and enabling Israel's military action in Gaza and beyond. So my question is, how essential do you think acknowledging the fact that the impunity our leaders have allowed Netanyahu's government is at its core a failed policy, and we have to do right by Palestinians in order to have any claim to an honest, morally responsible foreign policy?
Yes, thank you. You know, it's so challenging in this time to be young and to see what is transpiring in Gaza, because it is a humanitarian crisis. It is a crisis of dehumanization. It is a horror beyond our own recognition. But what is at the crux of it, you know, in the United States, of course, any criticism of Israel's conduct in Gaza often comes under severe political fire. But
here as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times the criticism of the critics, a lot of the things that I hear is, you know, you are specifically targeting Israel, it's anti-Semitic, you know, etc. And I think it's so important, and what I try to get across to so many of my colleagues, and including to President Biden, I delivered this message as well, is that we need people to understand that when our world leaders, leading up to this moment, when our world leaders say democracy is important and democracy is superior, when we ask why is democracy the way to go? The answer has always been because democracy is the only way that you can guarantee stability, respect for human rights, safety for all people, and prosperity. And what people see in Gaza, when, in my instance, when the United States supplies the weapons that are used to do this, when we have laws on the books that prohibit the United States from providing weapons in instances of gross human rights violations, what people are seeing is this entire argument for democracy fall apart. What they're saying is all of these reasons that we said democracy is superior were false. We're built on a lie because we're allowing this to happen. And so that is why when you see young people watching all of this unfold, that is why allowing this is a threat to our own democracy. We have to walk the walk, and we can't let those commitments go. And in many ways, holding our friends accountable sometimes is just as important as holding adversaries accountable, because it shows that we are pledging our fidelity to a standard, a value of human dignity. And I believe that it is not a coincidence that so much political instability has has transpired, as so many people have seen this happen, unfold before the world. But we cannot let this slide and descent continue. We can't give into it. It's a call to lean into our commitments on those standards even more. And it is excruciatingly challenging to feel like you're going crazy seeing these things and being, castigated for saying what you're seeing out loud. But I do believe that if we remain consistent, if we remain rooted in those values, and also, very importantly, remaining champions against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as well, we can hold the coalition together, because the far right does exploit anti-Semitism in moments like these, and we cannot let them do that either.
Absolutely. So I'm so happy that you were in Munich, because it's important that your voice is heard in the international arena as well. However, there's been a lot of speculation as to why you came. So maybe in your own words, why do you think it's important at this moment to enter this international arena and be part of that conversation too?
Well, first and foremost, I think that progressive foreign policy has not been represented internationally in a very long time, if not ever. And I felt that it was very important to start bringing that into spaces of power. We cannot yield the rooms where decisions are made because of whatever objections we may have, even with the majority of people who may be there. We cannot yield the space. We have to take up the space. We have to say the thing. And we need to give light to that. I think domestically there's all that speculation. But I will say my ambition has always been about conditions. I remain ambitious. But my ambitions are in changing our political environment. That's why when I was first elected, my ambition was to change the Democratic Party and to make it more economically populist and responsive to working class Americans, while also not yielding the civil rights of the most vulnerable people in the country. And that meant not just about my career, it meant we had to elect scores of elected officials that shared the same value. And so I think oftentimes the discussions about speculation, et cetera, are so narrow because frankly, I think the ambitions of a progressive movement go so far beyond elected office. We are coming for power for working people. And that means not just electoral power. We're coming to break up monopolies. We're coming to enforce antitrust. And we're coming to get cash in the pockets of working class Americans the world over. I mean, working class people the world over.
So we're now looking at the midterm elections in the US, and maybe give us a sense of the mood and what is your expectation for the midterm elections, and maybe also address the question, do you think that democracy will hold? Because there are very worrying steps being taken by the Trump administration to maybe really interfere with the voting and the democratic process itself. So what is your view on that? Are you confident that it will be a democratic election? And what do you think about the outcome, the possible?
Well, so much of what the Trump administration does is operate on intimidation. They try to make high-profile examples of people or incidents in order to intimidate the rest. For example, the arrest of journalist Don Lemon for being present during one of the protests in Minneapolis. They know that they can't arrest every journalist in Minneapolis, so they arrest one or two that are well known in order to scare people away from covering what is going on. But it is important to remember that there are more of us than them. And to your earlier question, when you said, what do you say to people who don't know what to do in this time? Every one of us can be sand in the gears of an injustice. And whether it is a delay, whether it is saying no, I think about how all the people in Minneapolis refused to let ICE officers use the bathroom in their establishments. I mean, it's a small thing, but it matters. It matters. It matters. Because to you, as one individual, you are a person that's kind of closing your shop to someone like that, and it's, it may seem almost petty or personal or whatever, but when a whole community bands together and does that, first of all, it creates a culture, which is part of what the ascendant right is doing, right? It creates a culture. We create a culture of protection of one another, a culture of solidarity with one another, and it's rebellious. But more importantly, it is it does put a very real strain on them. They have to run around, they don't know what to do, maybe they have to get their own facilities, and it starts to disorganize this apparatus that originally seemed very impenetrable, and that they could go around and do anything. And so this matters in our elections because Donald Trump cannot nationalize our elections. He's desperately trying to do these conference calls with states and saying we have this very serious security matter to all discuss with you, hoping that everybody buys in. And he is a master of the mirage. It is not a coincidence that he comes from something like 20 years of experience on television, that he is a multi-decade brander. He is the man of smoke and mirrors. If he can all get you to believe this thing, that there's a rabbit under this hat, then I can control your behavior. So an important thing is to challenge the mirage at every moment. I remember early on in the administration, early on in this term, early last year when they were first coming in, they said, okay, well, we're going to send ICE into these communities. And I represent one of the most immigrant-dense, diverse communities in the world. And so I knew that they had a target on our back. And so I immediately started organizing Know Your Rights sessions, closed doors, for mixed status families, for people who wanted to stand up for their neighbors, legal education, and legal defense. And we started educating people on their rights. If ICE knocks on your door, you do not have to let them in unless you have a judicial warrant. Things like this. If they try to come into your hospital, if they try to come into your school, you have tools, legal recourse of resistance. And at that time, the acting director of ICE went on television and threatened me with jail. He said that he was going to examine and explore a criminal referral of me to the Department of Justice, accusing me of illegally harboring immigrants or providing aid or what have you. And he did that in order to get me to stop. And sure, when you talk to the lawyers and people who are most cautious, their advice may be, protect yourself. But instead, in January or February, whenever it was at that time, I stood up and I went back on television and I said, make me. I dare you. I dare you. Take me away. And what happened? Quiet whimpering withdrawal of what they were doing. And do you know who that man was that threatened me with jail time? It was Thomas Homan, the man that they just put in charge in Minneapolis, who is now also whimpering, withdrawing from Minneapolis. And so, yes, they're going to try to do these things. They're talking about deploying ICE to polling stations. They're talking about trying to pass voter ID laws that would not affect immigrants. They would affect married women and women. Because women, when they are married, are most likely to not have their passport match their birth certificate when they change their name in the United States. And so they are trying to do all of these things, and it is so important for each of us to stand up and say, make me. Don't ask me, because my answer is no. And you would be surprised at how much they back off when you actually challenge what they are doing. And that's honestly part of the dynamic I think we saw play out in the conflict over Greenland and all this conversation over Greenland.
I was going to ask you, how much of that dare me attitude would you advise European leaders maybe to present in the transatlantic relationship?
I think, of course, I think this goes back to that alternative to the vision that Marco Rubio had put out, which is we want a strong US-European alliance, period. We want that. The question is that alliance must be built on values. And the alliance and that relationship could either be built on this ahistorical, nostalgic, make whatever that is great again idea, and that's the Marco Rubio thesis of what the values of the U.S.-European alliance are built on, or our alliance can be built on values of democracy and respect for international law. And so I want, and I think the majority of people want, an alliance that is built on values, that has integrity, and that means that when your friend is stepping out or has a little spinach in their teeth, you tell them, and you say, I'm not going to let you, because I love you, and because we share democratic values, I'm not going to let you go down this path because I know who you really are. And Americans, the vast majority of Americans, are deeply opposed to this nonsense with Greenland. So this is really about him. And as democracies, we have a responsibility to hold fast to one another based on those democratic values. And that, I think, is where we have that loving, firm relationship where we are looking out for our friends.
I can tell you our love is being tested at times.
Yes.
But you alluded to it several times. Marco Rubio outlined a transatlantic relationship based on cultural heritage, Western civilization, Christian heritage. And, well, we could also just call it what it is, white, shared white history. And yet here we are, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, two women of Latin American heritage, lawmakers in the US and Germany, in a time of democratic stress and global transformation, renegotiating the transatlantic relationship. So what do you think? Are we the transatlantic establishment worst nightmare or bright future?
I also found it to be, great irony, because Marco Rubio is Cuban. And
yes.
You would never know that from how he was like, I am from Spain. And I'm like, Hermano,
¿Qué pasa?
you're missing a step there. I think this is what is so beautiful, right? In that they want this idea that a new world means a denial of our past. There's a very big difference between whiteness and national, like your actual culture, right? Whiteness is an imaginary thing. Being German is real. Being Italian is real. Being English. These are rich cultural heritages that are based on values, and they are so much a part of what make our cultures and our societies what they are. And we are also home to many other communities as well. I think that diversity there is an insecurity that exists, and that insecurity is amplified in times of class stagnation. So it's important to know and connect the cultural dots with the economic conditions. But, I think they are threatened by the fact that they don't have to compete only with themselves anymore, but they have to compete against not just an elite that prevents opportunities to people from working class backgrounds or prevents people based on identity backgrounds or as women. But now when democracy opens the doors, it raises the bar for all of us. They probably are threatened. They probably are scared. But that's too bad for them.
That's their problem. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thank you very much for this conversation. We heard in Munich a vision of the West defined by ancestry and Western dominance. Tonight, I think we've discussed a different possibility, one rooted in democracy, solidarity, and human dignity. But democracy is not something to be watched, as we discussed. It's something we do. So let's open this discussion up. We have 1,000 students here who are eager, I'm sure, to ask questions. Berlin, the floor is yours. Thank you again for your...
Of course, no, thank you.
Yes, hello Congresswoman, my name is Gianni. I'm a student here in Berlin, and I also represent a lot of students online. I'm an influencer for students, and I asked them yesterday if they have a question for you, because many couldn't come because it was already booked. And the question that a lot of people asked, I got over 1,000 responses, was what does peace mean to you personally? Where does it start? And a second question I wanted to ask, as I represent a lot of students online, is if you could imagine if you would be open for taking a photo for the community.
I'm sorry, what was the last question?
If you could imagine taking a photo for the community.
He wants to take a photo with you.
Oh, yes, of course.
We will negotiate about that. But the first question you got.
To me, peace, of course, there is the long-held adage that peace is not the absence of violence, but the presence of justice. But it is, when I think about it in my personal life, right, when you close your eyes and imagine the life that you want, it is that you can provide for yourself and your family without too much strain, that you can feel like you can go to work or to school without worry, that you can live in a community that cares about you, and that you can travel to other places and feel the same welcome. And so it is material. It's about what we can have in our lives without too much strain. And so it means being paid well, but it also means being an environment that is not just tolerant, but accepting of all people. And how we do that both domestically and internationally is part of our aim and our goal.
Hi, AOC. Oh, hi. So first of all, thank you very much for being here. I really admire both of you, two women who are so inspiring for so many other women. Really, thank you so much for your courage. Thank you so much for your voice. My name is Hiba, and I'm also running for my city council again.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I really believe in community power and also representing our people, making them strong. And my question is, what do you recommend, like how to strengthen our communities more in our cities? What can we do to strengthen them? And maybe you can also explain why we should strengthen them more.
Well, I think it's how we strengthen our communities is a very tactical, I find, everyday kind of activity. It is the kind of stuff that doesn't get reported on in the media, but when I think about what I do in my district, especially given the position that I hold, it is in constant, everyday exercising of our networks. So whether it is, you know, most recently before I got on a plane here to Munich, we hosted a book giveaway for the Super Bowl. It was our Super Bowl celebration. So we gave away 30,000 children's books in the South Bronx. And families came, we had a DJ, we had cotton candy, people came in, they got books, they celebrated. Really, things like that are the everyday tissue that make up our communities. You know, being on school boards or hosting events, or really, I mean, it really is the daily work of breaking bread. One of the critiques that we have of capitalism is that its goal is isolation, and they want one of the last frontiers that they want to commodify is human relationship and connection. They don't want your friend to drive you to the airport because they want you to give money to an Uber. They don't want you to care for your friend's children because all of these things, the fragmenting of community is where you can make money. And so when we defy that in small acts, like driving your friend to the airport, or in larger acts, like what we saw in Minneapolis, where these were just everyday people coming out and buying a vest and putting it on and blowing a whistle when they saw an ICE agent. All of this scaffolds on one another. And especially in a moment where right-wing populism is ascendant, it preys on communities not being in connection with one another. You can build suspicion of your immigrant neighbors or of your queer friend at school if people don't have those relationships. And one of actually the good news is that the fastest way that you can diffuse movements like that is actually building those social ties, because then when, you know, these horrible caricatures are said in public, people say, wait a second, no, I know my friend that's like this, and they aren't like that. And so it is the kind of stuff that often gets taken for granted, but when you do it day in and day out, it becomes really important building blocks for safety in numbers.
So who's next? There is the microphone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Or no? Sorry.
Over here, yes.
Sorry,
I'm over
I
here.
didn't see you. Yes.
Hi, I'm a journalist from Berlin, and I think I'm really particularly interested in the arguments that you make around the so-called rule-based order. In Davos 3 weeks ago, the Canadian Prime Minister said countries like Canada spent decades placing a sign in the window, going along with American-led order that they knew was partially a fiction. And he said that bargain is over, and then your democratic colleagues at the conference in Munich basically told us that Trump is just temporary, we're still here, it's only 3 more years. And I wonder, as Europeans, should we listen to Carney and move on, or should we wait until it's over?
Well, 3 years is a long time. And we just saw what happened in the first 4 weeks of 2026. So I think the answer here is mixed, is that it is important for all of us to recognize that there is a world after Donald Trump. And our hope, when we discuss the midterms, our hope is that the first waning, the first real material waning will happen as early as November. It's important that we remain pretty clear about that, because if we get too far into the catastrophizing about Trump, then we actually end up giving up before we need to. So that remains important. That being said, as I said, 3 years is a very long time. And the area where the president has some of the most autonomous agency is in foreign affairs. And so I think there are 2 things here. I believe that what Carney said in his speech was very prescient, and I think that it was very resonant among all of us for a reason. But the question then becomes, if that's the case, then what do we do? And that's one of the reasons why I delivered the message that I did at Munich, because what it could mean is, well, the rules-based order is done, so everybody, let's have a big oligarchy party. And let's just throw all the rules for ourselves out the window. And I'm not here to suggest that that's what Carney was saying, but there was a line where he said corporations and countries. And we cannot allow corporations to acquire the same power as nation states. When you do, it is inherently autocratic, because corporations are self-driven. They often have one CEO at the top, and they are unelected, not transparent, and they are driven towards profit maximization, even if it oftentimes means at the cost of human rights, ethical standards, what have you, and workers' rights, poor wages. And that is why nation states and democracies need to prevail. And so that is why, I think it's important to be realistic about it and to be realistic about this moment, but also to see Donald Trump not just as an individual, but a symbol of a consolidation of corporate power and right-wing regimes and autocratic regimes. And that conceptually is what we are trying to resist. And that is a lesson that I think we can all integrate in what we're bringing and doing at home.
I think the next question is over there.
Hello? Hello? Yeah, you can hear me? Yeah. So first of all, thank you for your talking points. You said that you think it's important to hold friends accountable. And I think it kind of has a bitter taste when our Prime Major Giffey stands there talking about that academia has to fight for values when the Berlin government, led by the CDU as well as the SPD, pushed major repressions on pro-Palestine protests in the last years. And
Can you speak a little bit more loudly,
yeah,
just so I can hear the
I
rest
think
of you?
like us, the students who were fighting for those values in the last few years, were experiencing like major police repression, brutality, and all that. As well as the Berlinale, she gave you a small pin. Just a few days ago, they said, oh, they're an unpolitical festival when asked about Palestine solidarity. So my question is, while not directly supporting far-right movements, parties as the SPD are definitely not stepping up enough against those kind of parties like the CDU, who do everything that they can to take away workers' right achievements from the past decade. So my question to you is like, how can we cooperate with those kind of people in those kind of times when, in my opinion, they don't support our fights enough?
Thank you. So, I apologize. I just want to make sure, because I was having a little, I just want to make sure, you're asking how do we cooperate, given the crackdowns on the protests that were supported, how do you cooperate given that?
Yeah, and especially how do you cooperate with parties, for example, as the SPD, who have good ideas but don't stand up enough
Yes.
right and collaborate with parties like the CDU, who, as for example, Chancellor Merz, trying to cut workers' rights everywhere. And it's hard for me to navigate with those kind of people because I don't feel they stand up when it matters.
Okay, well, yes. I can tell you that I very much relate to the position that you describe. When I first was elected, you know, in the United States, we of course have a two-party system. We don't have the parliamentary system that you all have here. And in some ways, I mean, I guess the grass is always greener in some sense. But when I was first elected, I'm almost hesitating because I know if people are watching back home, they're all going to be mad when I say this, and they are mad when I say things. But the fact of the matter was, 8 years ago when I was elected, I was treated horribly by my own party. I just was. I was told that I was an enemy of my party, that I was going to be the reason why the right won, that I was going to cause that the entire future of the country was in balance, and that I was the reason why we would lose. And what was hurtful about it was that they were telling me this because of what I believed. I was being told this because of my commitment to trans rights, because of my commitment for Medicare for All, which is seen as radical communist propaganda in the United States, that I believe in workers' rights. And in the Democratic Party, we have a broad coalition. And so some of the most conservative members of the Democratic Party, it can be hard. And I had moments, my first re-election, in my first term, I didn't think I was going to run for re-election. I thought I was going to be one term and done because of how painful and challenging it was. I think there's something that we just have to do, especially as an international left, is that all of us, too often there's a lot of minimization of left movements, but all of us, I think, need to swallow some medicine about the moment. I would say, speak in the US context, I think mainstream Democrats have had to swallow some medicine about the fact that their youth and that generationally, particularly on the issue of Palestine, is quite clear about how they feel about this. In the US, there were similar crackdowns on student protests, et cetera. And that there has to be some give on that front, with the brutal reality that we are all that we have. We will not survive apart. And I know that I've been there. It feels very difficult and challenging when sometimes the people who are diminishing you are the ones that you need. And that goes in all directions, right? We have to learn how to hold conflict and hold together in conflict. And I think it requires acknowledgement. And again, it requires concessions for all of us. It's hard because we have to tell the truth. It's not to say we can't say these things. It's not to say you're not allowed to say these things. God forbid. But it is to say that we need to be able to be very angry at each other and also know what the real enemy is.
So way in the back.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, my name is May. I want to thank you for being here, and also thank you on behalf of a lot of Arabs for speaking up for Palestinian rights. You already spoke a bit about the ICE raids in the US right now, and Scott Galloway has called for an economic, boycott. And I was wondering if you agree that this is the best way to resist or, speak up against what's happening for everyday people, also maybe for other countries like we here in Germany. And also, do you think there's more that US politicians could be doing right now? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Oh, well, there's always more that we could be doing. In terms of economic boycotts, I do think that they can be effective. One of the first companies to capitulate to Donald Trump's anti-DEI, anti-diversity initiatives was Target. And we started to see a movement led by Black Americans and Black organizers and leaders around boycotting Target, because Target was essentially boycotting them in complying with these demands. And I think what we saw was a real effect. There was a real economic effect. And then you contrast that with another company like Costco, which refused to yield to these, and everybody started to shop there. And I think that sometimes people can be cynical about these things and say, oh, well, they don't work, they're highly individualistic. I think we have to try everything, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but at least we try. Now, in the United States, of course, there's a lot of talk about general strikes. Germany does strikes much better and much more frequently than sometimes we're able to organize after so much of the union busting that has transpired in the United States. But people are starting to flex their muscle around it. And one of the things that we know is that, including President Trump, he responds to economic developments, he responds to the stock market, and we see him do very quick turnarounds when decisions are reflected almost immediately in the stock market and in the Dow. And so I think that it's certainly something that we can do, but also on top of it, in addition to boycotts, we can also explore the construction of affirmative economic structures, even on a smaller level, worker cooperatives, investing in small businesses, not just where we are withholding our money from, but where we want to pour our money into. And I think it's going to take a lot of attempts to get to a place of scale, but that is the work of change. Every overnight success is 10 years in the making, and that applies to organizing as well, but I do think that it can happen quickly.
Thank you so much.
Hello. Is it on? Perfect, thanks. My name is Joshua. Thank you for taking this question, and thank you so much for your work. You've immensely inspired me during the course of my life. You've rightfully spoken out about hypocrisy in international politics, and you've also been rightfully outspoken about the genocide in Gaza. I'm therefore respectfully wondering why exactly you are participating in public outreach together with the Social Democratic Party, who has been a major facilitator of weapons exports towards Israel. This whole event... This whole event, while very interesting, also comes across as an attempt by the SPD to whitewash their image and rid themselves of their complicity in this genocide, especially amid the upcoming Berlin mayoral election, in which the left party has an actual shot of winning. Franziska Giffey was booed today because as a mayor she stood against everything that Mamdani would fight for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your question. And, you know, I think first and foremost, this is not the only engagement that we're in my visit to Berlin. I'll be visiting with Die Linke tomorrow. I'll be at the Rosa Luxemburg Institute discussing the wealth tax. And I think in the totality of that, and the reason I've made those choices intentionally is to speak to that earlier point, which is that, and I certainly don't want to come across as though I'm favoring any one party over another, and that's why we're visiting with multiple in this trip. But again, as a left coalition, we are going to have to figure this out. I do believe that just as in the United States, there needs to be an opening in the discussion of what is happening in Gaza and towards the treatment of Palestinians and the crackdown of the freedom of speech of individuals who are trying to change the world for the better, for the basic respect of human rights, dignity, and to end the blockades, to end the genocide. And so I say that because we also have to do that coalitionally. We can grow left electoral movements, and we have to persuade moderate movements to have an open mind about how we discuss and approach human rights in the region. And that is why I say that our work has to be coalitional. It has to be coalitional. We have to grow our ranks and we have to persuade. And so I say this again because if we go separately, we will lose it all. We will lose it all. And so it's and I want to be very clear. I want to be very clear that that is not a negation. That is not a point of negation. It is a point of coalition. And so it means that everyone has something to give here. And that's why I'm proud to be meeting with both Die Linke tomorrow and to be here with SPD today, because we cannot let the right win. We just can't.
I think the mic is over there. I'm sorry, we do not decide where it goes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Is it? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So do I move on or not? Sorry. Okay.
You go ahead.
Thank you so much, first of all, for all the topics and all the answers today. I think it is very, very motivational for everyone, but I think for women especially. I just wanted to say, and then to ask as well, that it's February, and for me, February is not only a month of, like St. Valentine's and all the romantics, but it's also for somebody who comes from Ukraine as a year of fight where it all began in a full scale. So I want to raise some attention towards the war in Ukraine. And And yeah, just to say that while I am lucky to live since 10 years in freedom in Berlin and study at this university, thanks for that. A lot of, in my hometown, are fighting this winter, Russia, Putin, the regime, and yeah, just a huge nightmare that is lasting for 4 years where I come from and even longer for other regions. So my question is, you said before, for our democratic values, we have to fight, and as Europe, we have to show our teeth. How do you think, what should we do for those 3 years where we are kind of disabled and need more support? What should be the action from Europe, from European Union, but also from the United States, how we could support Ukraine, and also how could we navigate in the meantime while, yeah, as I said, the situation is very hard, and it's not only the war, it's also the winter, and yeah, it's very hard. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for bringing this issue to the fore, and I think there is a reason why Ukraine is the center of so many of our discussions and, of course, our international care and concern, because it is also the front line for the authoritarian encroachment and violation of national sovereignty. And so this is about Putin, this is about Russia, but this is also about oligarchy and impunity and abuse of power. I want to say that affirmatively, the United States unequivocally stands with Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. And the good news, the one piece of good news is, as you said, 3 years is a long time to wait on this administration, but congressional authorizations and appropriations and the sending of aid, that originates in the Congress. And that must be mandated. And it should not be forgotten that the first impeachment of President Trump was over aid to Ukraine and his illegal withholding of aid to Ukraine. And so there's very important ties here for that. But the entire reason I bring that up is because once Congress authorizes that aid, no president can stop it. And when Democrats win the majority, as we knock on wood and make sure that they do, I know that that commitment to Ukraine will be there, it will be appropriated, and that the entirety of the Democratic Party stands unequivocally with Ukraine. And so I say that, but of course, more importantly, the spirit of people, of the American people, stand with Ukraine as well. And the more we tell this story and the more that we discuss its importance, the more I think we will be able to win that fight, and our hearts are with you. So thank you.
So I'm going to be the party pooper and say this, unfortunately, is the last question, but that's the role we have anyway, seems. So yeah, make it a good one.
Is it on? Yeah. You can hear me, right? Yeah. Hello, Congresswoman. My name is Joschka, and I have to admit my eyes have been watery throughout this entire evening because I just love you, and you've been my idol for so long.
That's so nice.
And
That's a good start. That's a good start.
And you're also a huge part of the reason why I'm running for city council in the upcoming Berlin election. And the question I wanted to ask is rather serious, because I've been, in the past couple of weeks, I've been so sickened by what's happening with the Epstein files. And
yes. Thank you.
I mean, I could rant for hours about Pam Bondi and those people, but what I really wanted to ask you is, what do you think might be the next steps in uncovering the whole truth? Because it's just unimaginable, and I think we should really make sure that all these people are prosecuted. And yeah, how do we do that?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And it really is, it is just a shock to all of our senses, seeing some of the things that have been unveiled in the Epstein files, the people who knew, the connections that are involved. It is shocking. One avenue of hope that I have around this is that despite all of the shocking things that have happened and transpired in the past, for some reason, I think, for a lot of reasons, this scandal over the Epstein files is kind of breaking the cultish grip that the right has had over some in its base. And so this actually is not a partisan, the response to this has not necessarily been partisan. And that, I think, is where we have a lot of hope. There are a lot of just everyday people who voted for Republicans who are demanding accountability and answers on this. And Pam Bondi stood there in front of the Congress of the United States and had the audacity to say, in response to what are we doing about these child predators, to say, well, the Dow Jones is above 50,000 or whatever it is that she said. It is giving, the response that she had was so inappropriate, it's almost as though the feeling of implication is quite broad. You have Howard Lutnick, who knowingly brought his family to Epstein's Island after he was convicted of child sex trafficking. This has to go all the way to the top. It does go all the way to the top. And my hope is that the growing disgust over this will not be able to hold in the Republican Party. But there has to be accountability. It is shocking the amount of power that we have that has been held by predators. And not only that, but these were the people that were making decisions over governments, over massive companies and corporations. And I think the important thing to also communicate here is that there is a connection between the concentration of wealth that we are seeing, the concentration of political power that we are seeing, and what is transpiring in the Epstein files. I can say that as a survivor of sexual assault myself, but many people know that crimes of sexual assault, of rape, of abuse are not about sexuality. They are about power. They are about abuse of power. It is about the ability to feel that you can subjugate another human being and violate their agency. And it is not a coincidence that perpetrators of sexual abuse and perpetrators of rape and assault are also people that have deep complexes about power and the acquisition of power in the world. And this is why, people think of domestic abuse and sexual assault as a gender issue. It is a canary in the coal mine issue. People who often are engaged in sexual assault and abuse are twice as likely to be involved, if there's a gun crime, mass shooters in the United States often have track records of gender violence and gender-based violence. There's a direct connection here around a sense of impunity, the acquisition of power, and sexual abuse. And it is, to me, deeply pervasive. And when we hold sexual crimes to account, I actually believe that it is a pillar of any anti-corruption platform and outcome that we desire to have as a society. And it's why we have to do it on an interpersonal level, because it goes all the way to the top. And it's just shocking to see all of this, and we cannot let it go, and we cannot allow them to desensitize us to this. It does not surprise me that the same authors of the quote-unquote anti-cancel culture movement, right, all of these people who have been trying to tell us that basic humanity and upholding standards of dignity is cancel culture, it's not surprising to me that they say, oh, you can't speak out against this or that, you can't hold that person accountable because it's cancel culture. Now, I'm sure they don't want us to hold pedophilia accountable, and they think having an anti-pedophilia stance would be cancel culture. That's the erosion in culture, morality that is being hinted at here when Pam Bondi says there's no more work here to be done. Really? You are the Attorney General of the United States of America and you don't want to hold any one of these pedophiles accountable? Resign or be impeached.
I want to thank the audience for this amazing discussion. And let me add from my perspective, I think it's important that we stay in conversation. We take your anger and your criticism, but we do not take your apathy. So stay engaged, stay in conversation. We have to build a big coalition against the dangers of the far right, as we have discussed today. But to end maybe on a more hopeful note, Alexandria, you spend now a few days here. What gives you hope?
You all? I know that in many ways, for so many of us, our lives, as challenging as they may feel, are an impossible dream of so many of the people that came before us. And it is only through our belief in one another that we're able to make miraculous things happen. Sometimes the odds can be completely against you, that there's no material shred of evidence to believe that a good outcome can happen. When I ran for office, I was a waitress running against someone that had 20 years of legislative experience. I had no money, I had no connections, and I was somehow going to my neighbors hat in hand saying, I'm actually more qualified than him. And it feels ludicrous on its face. But I made the appeal in saying, I know your life better, because we share it. And we can fight for things better because we're doing it together. And it was a sheer miracle that the collective belief of my community said, let's give it a shot. What do we have to lose? And I think we can all have that belief in one another. We can aspire to things that may seem impossible, but when we all believe it, like when we spoke about breaking Trump's mirage, we can counter the mirage with a dream. And when we believe in that dream, when we act in the faith of that dream, as opposed to acting in faith, and acquiescing in advance to the cynical mirage, when we act in faith to a collective dream, we can make things happen. We can take on these companies, we can take on the entrenched power, we can raise our wages, we can secure a future for our elders, we can live in dignity, and we do not have to cede our quality of life to a machine that is eating our lives and our labor. It doesn't have to be this way, and it won't be if we commit ourselves to one another. And so I thank you for that. I know it is messy work, and that's part of the fun. So I look forward to being with you together. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you. Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you.
So much. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you.